Ainetith Iquanasilam Nava. Good evening. It's good to see you all. I'd like to call the business committee meeting to order. It is with great respect and humility. We acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people may maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ages traditions, teachings, stewardships, and expressions of reciprocity. I'd also like to acknowledge that some of us are meeting on the unceded territory of the Tsinawas and Stz'uminus people. Good evening. Are there any additions to the agenda? Or any deletions or changes in order? If not, I would seek a motion to approve the agenda. Thank you, Greg. Do we have a seconder? Thanks, Chantel. If anyone is opposed to the approval of the agenda, could you please type it in the chat? Okay, seeing none, I would seek a motion to approve that the minutes of the business committee meeting held on June 12th, 2024 be approved. Thank you, Greg. Seconded by Tom. Is there anyone opposed to the approval of the minutes? Okay, seeing none. Number 7, presentations, we have none. So moving on to number 8, senior staff reports, 8.1. Mark Walsh, Secretary Treasurer, and Jillian Robinson, Executive Director of Communication and Privacy, regarding Rutherford Elementary reopening, consultation, and feedback.
Great, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So the order of operation this evening on this item, I'm just going to briefly kick us off and then turn it over to Jillian to discuss the feedback, and then she'll turn it back over to me to discuss the recommendations. What we're hoping for is perhaps the questions can wait until after both presentations, because I think a number of the issues raised in the feedback may well be addressed by additional recommendations that are for the board. For the public's interest, this step this evening is the second to final, well, I guess the third to final step prior to the opening of Rutherford in the event that we're going to proceed with the motion as recommended. Tonight, the board is being asked to pass a number of recommendations associated with that reopening, subject to one item that we'll likely bring back to the board at a later time that we'll present. And then finally, the board would then pass it at the end of September in the event that the board deems to wish it to do so, and then we are rolling with the next step. So we turn it over to Jillian, and then I'll be back in a moment to talk to you about the recommendations.
So thank you, Mark. Everyone, I'm pleased to be here tonight to share what we heard from the community, reaching out through our consultation process. So I just want to highlight how we went about consulting and soliciting feedback on this plan. And so overall, what we did was initially we had 4 emails over several weeks that communications drafted, and we shared with the school principals to share with their family communities. And I just want to emphasize as well that we included those families that were registered for kindergarten as well. So they were families that are coming into kindergarten this year were included in the consultation. So we also shared general information. We shared a link to information, and we also created an information website with very detailed information, including a Google map, so people could see the potential new boundary changes, a question and answer section, email for people to ask questions or submit their feedback, and then later we had a survey that ran from June 11th to 30th. And we sent out a couple of reminder emails to families that it was available, and again, that it was closing on the 30th to give people time to submit a good amount of time and reminders to share their comments. So I'm pleased to share that about 60% heard about the change of boundary changes from the district ourselves. So from principals sharing that email. So I really want to say thank you to our principal and vice principals in the district for reaching out to families. And they also received calls and emails from families as well, and answered questions and spoke to people about their concerns. We also additionally had 2 briefings with local media. We sat down with the Now, and we sat down with the Nanaimo News Bulletin, their reporters, to do a presentation and walk them through what the proposal was and how this would work, and give them lots of time to ask questions and understand what the process was. And as a result, they each printed a story. And we did have other families as well saying that they heard through the local media about the Rutherford reopening and proposed catchment boundary changes. So overall, we had 352 responses. And again, these are from the schools with where families would potentially be affected by catchment boundary changes. And we had 30 direct emails as well, and many of those were feedback and people's thoughts and what they wanted the board to know about how the proposed catchment boundary changes would impact them. But not all 30 were. Just want to clarify that several of those included people just asking for clarification. Whether or not, for example, if they were moving to the Solaire catchment, does that mean that they have to go to Solaire? And no, we clarified through the proposal, what that meant for their family. So a number of those were clarification emails as well. And then additionally, Mark Walsh and Jackie Poulin visited the DPAC and a couple of PACs as well to sit down with families and answer questions and hear their thoughts on the feedback. So we've broken everything down in the consultation report through the various methods and what we heard. But today I'll just highlight the main areas of what we heard from families in terms of feedback. And they fall into some, some very strong themes emerged. So the first one that we heard mostly, that adjusting to a new school would be difficult for families, would be difficult for their children. And that primarily related to anxiety, mental health challenges, just change in general, and potentially the loss of friendships. The second one we heard was related to transportation, and a strong theme in there was concerns about families having to cross Hammond Bay Road or walk along Hammond Bay Road if their school changed, and whereas they weren't in a situation where their children would have to do that now. And that was primarily crossing at the crosswalks and the amount of traffic on Hammond Bay. So we also heard from people in terms of transportation that some people, if they were at Departure Bay heading north to Frank Jane, would increase their overall commute time. And a primary reason for that was a lot of families work downtown and they're taking their children to school on the way, dropping them at Departure Bay. So going north, as you can imagine, and then coming towards downtown was adding time to their commute as well. The third area that we heard as well was that people were concerned about loss of childcare. They have a good system, whether that's with family and friends or neighbors, or they're with a really good program as well that provides after school care and spring break care and other areas, and they were concerned about losing that access to that. But I do want to emphasize that we did receive a strong number of emails as well, supportive of the change, and survey responses that were supportive of reopening Rutherford, and some families saying that they were excited for the change. They were excited. They live near Rutherford. They're excited to go to school really close to where they live. And then another area that we looked at as well as we asked people through our survey if there is they feel there's an anomaly with their address, please share your address with us so we can take a look at the map. So we received about 73 address submissions. We looked at every single one on the map to understand what the impacts were. So from those address submissions, primarily they were people who would be crossing Hammond Bay to go to school. Also what we heard as well is that the Oak Ridge community as well, not in favor of going to Frank J. Ney because it's further in terms of distance as opposed to Departure Bay, whether that's in commute because people are heading the north and the south or for other reasons. And then with the addresses as well, there were a few where it wasn't clear, maybe the road, the proposed catchment boundary is coming down the middle of the road. And then another area we heard as well is some people who are closer towards Departure Bay in the Cosgrove area, and that's moving to Solaire, and they felt that, and that is a greater distance. However, it's again important to note that anyone who's in the district and at Departure Bay already will not be required to move. So those are some of the overall themes and highlights that we heard through our consultation process. And altogether, we were in communication and out there receiving feedback for 3+ weeks from people with plenty of reminders and reaching out to our community to let them know what was happening, sharing lots of information and various ways of submitting their feedback through the process. I'll throw that back to Mark now.
Thank you, Jillian. So with respect to the recommendations, I thought that I would take a moment to go through them one by one, and the board will also recognize that they've seen 6 of them before, and there's 5 additional recommendations that are present that are intended to reflect our attempt to address some of the community concerns that we heard. I do want to be clear, however, that ultimately the goal is to reopen Rutherford in a robust fashion, and so there's going to be the requirement to move some students in order to make that successful. So of course, individuals that just are not interested in moving, there may be an opportunity for cross-boundary transfer requests, but in reality, we want to be very clear that we're not going to be able to be responsive to all of those concerns if our ultimate goal is to try to make Rutherford a vibrant school from the get-go. So with that, and sorry I won't be looking at the camera for a moment, I'm going to be going down the list. But so the first recommendation that the catchments presented for McGirr, Randerson, Frank Ney, Departure Bay, Uplands Park, Solaire, Rutherford, and Rock City take effect to January 2025. And so you'll see the removal of the word final approval because this recommendation going to the board is that. So these are not changed from the time that was presented in June. However, when I get to recommendation 9, there may be a slight tweak that will be coming in the future, but generally no large shifts based off of the feedback that we've received. Second, students located in the new Rutherford and revised Frank Ney catchments be required to attend their catchment school as of September 2025, with the exception of students beginning in grade 7 in that year. So a couple of points to mention here. The changes to all the other catchments. So the Rutherford catchment contains parts of McGirr, Ney, Randerson, and the new Ney catchment contains part of Departure Bay. Those are the students that would be required to be moving, subject, of course, to being in grade 7 in that September. the students that would be impacted at Rock City or Uplands or the other mentioned schools, none of the students would be required to move. It would be upon new registration and or moving into the community starting in kindergarten, as an example. And so that's related to some of the concerns that Jillian raised by some of the Solaire community that I'll get to just in a moment. That the number 3, that students required to attend their new catchment schools as of September 2025 be given priority cross-boundary transfer in the event of sufficient space and staffing to support them. So this was an attempt to prioritize for this year, prioritize the ability of the students that are not wanting to go to perhaps be able to stay on in their school that we're asking them to transfer from. However, in our community consultation, and Assistant Superintendent Poulin and myself attended a number of schools, we're very clear that we don't want to set expectations too high that this is going to be significant numbers, because again, there's space will be limited because we are going to be limiting access to portables, as well as we're not going to be assigning additional staff that wouldn't be required for the school needs. So this would be, we look at the org once we've served all the kids within the school and we see, 4 spaces in grade 5, we could look at the transfer request. So it wouldn't be, hey, 20 people want to stay, we're going to assign another teacher to that school for the year. That's not what that priority would mean in the circumstance. So again, I do not want it to, suggest that we're going to be able to meet the demand on that front. 4, the current enrolled departure-based students who are required to attend Frank Ney due to catchment shifts are provided access to Wellington Secondary if their siblings attend the school. And we have an additional recommendation that I'll touch on at the end with respect to that issue. Number 5, the district proceed with upgrading Rutherford using minor capital funding from the ministry and childcare, and the annual facilities grant is appropriate. And in fact, there's some additional money that will be noticed here this evening as well when we get to the surplus that was approved by the board last year that hasn't been executed yet. Number 7 on page 14 of 162. Oh, sorry, number 6, that the bus route instituted to Frank Ney following the closure of Rutherford be eliminated as of September 2025. That recommendation is still there to be transparent to the community that busing would no longer exist where it previously did. However, a recommendation slightly alters that, but we didn't want to take it out because we again wanted to be transparent to those impacted by the bus being taken away. So again, on page 14 of 162 were the additional recommendations. Number 1, and this one's a confusing one, and I apologize in advance, that the siblings of grade 7 students at Departure Bay Elementary who are legacied pursuant to recommendation 2 in 2025-6 may remain at Departure Bay until completion of elementary school. And so what we were initially envisioning is if your son or daughter, your student is in grade 7 in September 2025 and you should have gone to Rutherford or Frank Ney, we're going to let you stay. And if you have siblings at Departure Bay, we're going to let them stay for that year as well. And then we envisioned that those students, once the grade 7 moved up to Wellington, that those students would then move over to Frank Ney. And what was pointed out by some families, and there's only a few impacted, is, okay, so you're going to let us go to Wellington. So you let our kids all stay at Departure Bay for the 1 year, and then our grade 7 goes to Wellington. Then you send our other students off to Frank Ney, but you are letting them go to Wellington in the end. So you're going to take them out of their cohort, put them into a new cohort, and then essentially take them out of their cohort again by letting them go to Wellington. So we looked at the numbers, and there's only about 5 people that may be impacted. And so we thought that essentially that legacy would be able to continue without making a major impact on what we're trying to achieve in the overall plan. So again, if it's not clear, I do apologize, but it certainly is in response to one of the concerns raised that we were very sympathetic to kind of an absurd result occurring in the circumstances. Number 8, that the current Frank Ney bus route serving students in Rutherford area be reallocated to Oak Ridge and Golden Oaks. And so Jillian mentioned that we received a significant amount of feedback about concerns about transportation from those two neighborhoods. So this would be the kind of Stevenson Point almost part of the Departure Bay, although that's staying in Departure Bay. So Oak Ridge and Golden Oaks are new neighborhoods, largely. And currently they're mostly out of walk distance to Departure Bay. And we've had a lot of concerns raised that, well, now it's even further. So what we're proposing, and it works very well by just reallocating the bus, is now to take those kids and bring them to Frank Ney with the bus. We're thinking that we may be able to serve some students also impacted going to Dover, but numbers would have to be reviewed first. As noted, there is good transit along that stretch for the older students particularly, so we wouldn't want to guarantee that, but we think we've solved many of the concerns about parents and transportation in that area. I will note some parents said, well, look, it's really convenient for me to drop off at Departure Bay and then go to work. Of course, going all the way to Frank Ney from that area and then going back downtown if that's where you work is not. But certainly the transportation issue we believe would be solved. And it's taking a number of kids too that right now are well outside of walk distance and providing them transportation. Number 9, staff returned by November board meeting to address the request for minor catchment adjustments. And so we said to the community and the board that we were going to get a committee together to talk about, you know, people that live on a cul-de-sac, and we've made an error and split up the cul-de-sac. So they're going to a different school than their immediate neighbor, as an example, or maybe we cut off a road in an odd way. So we have a few of those that we're going to take a look at. There's another couple of concerns with respect to the Solaire catchment that we think we'd have some time to look at, and because we wouldn't be impacting incumbents immediately. So essentially, no one's being asked to move reflective of that particular change. We thought we'd have time to look at it without impacting us proceeding in the planning of Rutherford. So yes, it leaves a loose end in the plan, but certainly we think that we can dig a little bit deeper and hopefully resolve some of the remaining concerns. Number 10, staff prioritize active transportation plan with Nanaimo for Rutherford. This is active, but we just wanted to make it clear to our communities that this is a priority. And so this stems directly from the parents expressing concerns about walking across Hammond Bay to get to Rutherford. The reality is if we didn't change that section of the current Randerson catchment into Rutherford, this pull plan doesn't work. And so we think that we can come up with, working with our partners, a positive active transportation outcome, which we'll, I think we believe we started now, but certainly when the board proceeds, we'll be able to put it in full effect. And then finally, ensure sufficient human and financial resources to ensure student transition is done in the most supportive way for our families. So we hope this was going to be an obvious thing that we would be doing. The board has supported financial supports for the school. We already have a tentative principal, well, not a tentative principal, we have a principal for the tentative opening in place, and that's Mike Lundeen. And we've given extra staffing to Rock City to support his active participation in the opening of the school once the decision is finally made. So there'll be transition activities. We envision that for all impacted, well, for Departure Bay and Frank Ney, and for the impacted schools with respect to Rutherford, but we also obviously wanted to respond to our community's concerns. So those are the recommendations. So we think we've done a reasonably good job in trying to respond to some of the concerns that we've heard. Of course, we have not responded to all of them because that would involve potential significant changes that impact the kind of robust future nature of Rutherford. The last thing I'll note is, and the next item on the agenda is going to address this as well, is that we have done the numbers with respect to our consultants, with respect to what the future of that neighborhood looks like. And so you'll note in our previous report, we've actually built Randerson to be smaller than its capacity. So if we took the boundaries that are proposed for Randerson, it's proposed to be smaller, but that's an area of intense growth. And we've done the numbers and we envision Green Thumb, the Bowers District students being served by Randerson. And we're, by the end of that, which is a long way out, we might be having to look at portables again, but we think this will put us in good stead to support growth in the North End for at least the coming decade. So happy to answer any questions, and Assistant Superintendent Poulin is here as well to talk about any specifics with respect to transition, being so experienced in that. And I do want to express my appreciation for the work of everyone involved, Ms. Sutton, Mr. Sabo, Ms. Robinson, and again, Jackie Poulin, my partner in working with our communities and our principals to get this information, along with Jillian. So happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Jillian and Mark. I see Greg has a question.
Yes, thank you. Through you to staff. Me, if it's okay, I might just start out with a quick comment and just to thank staff for this work. This has been an excellent process, and I'm really pleased with the amount of community input that we've received and the response to that input that staff is recognized in the updated recommendations, which leads me to my question, perhaps to Ms. Poulin. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit more about what the transition might look like to try to appease some of the parents whose students might be concerned with anxiety or sort of, the impacts of uncertainty with respect to having to go to a new school.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you. Always a good question when we're looking at transitioning students. We always know that it's a difficult, doesn't matter if it's a school closure or an opening or just when a family moves. In this case, we'll be doing a lot of work with the communities, both with the Rutherford new community, as well as students who will be coming from Departure Bay to Frankenay. So once we know for sure what the boundaries are and registrations are sorted through and we know who the students are, I'll be working very closely with Mike Lundeen to plan activities to bring students together at Rutherford prior to the school year starting. So we're looking at May and June, being able to bring them to Rutherford, doing some activities on the field, connecting together, meeting who their peers are from the school that they're coming from, as well as other schools that they might be connecting up with. And a lot of schools in our North End, kids connect together in different ways and sport groups. And so they might find out that a great friend that they didn't realize they were going to be connecting up with now at Rutherford may be part of the mix. We'll be doing the same thing for Frankenay. As students, once we know who's coming from Departure Bay, we'll make sure that we have opportunities at Frankenay for them to come see the school, do a walkthrough, meet some of the staff there, meet the other students and do some activities with them. So we'll be definitely doing some whole school types of things. Of course, for all of our students that have disabilities and diverse abilities, we will make sure that there's appropriate transition meetings and that we have time to connect staff together to make sure that the supports that have been in place, that the incoming staff at Rutherford and at Frankenay know about those students, know what their needs are and what the supports are that are needed for them so we can put those all in place. That's the beauty of having Mike Lundeen already named as principal, as we can start to work together. Mike and I are already starting to do lots of conversations around what we can do to make sure that Rutherford is a welcoming and vibrant location for them to come to, and making sure that the building is ready to welcome students in and has all the supplies and resources that it needs. It's going to be a lot of work, but I think it'll be a positive, and we'll make it the best we can for all the students, that they will have a great location to come.
Thank you. May I have a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. I appreciate that, and I'm hoping that will help alleviate some of the uncertainties that I think we've heard through the feedback. Do you, my follow-up is, do you envision there being some, for example, opportunities for students to tour their new schools before the start of the school year? And is there anything you could offer us to have a bit of an understanding of what that is likely to look like?
Oh, absolutely. So, of course, when the students coming from Departure Bay come to Frankenay, Frankenay is open and running. So we would definitely have students be able to come through We'll probably do some evening sessions where families can come through and have a chance to see the building, see the space, so right into the building. Rutherford, I know they've been working on it. And so again, in the spring, we would have activities where students could go through the building, have a chance to be in, as long as it's open and ready. So as long as all the work that needs to get done, same thing that we would have parents being able to come in and do an evening or an after school types of open house so that families can come in and see what the building is like. So the activities would be not only on the field and on the school grounds, but as long as we can get into the building, as long as it's ready. We of course know that, May and June that, our facilities crew would have all of July and August to finish any work. So we'd have access to the space in the school that was ready, and definitely would want to be in and having tours. It's important for kids to see where they're coming for September. It's important for families to see where their children are going in September. So we would definitely want to make that happen.
Thank you.
Chantel.
Great, thank you. That's a question I was going to ask too. Good one, Greg. Great answers, Jackie. Thank you so much. Through you, Chair. Now, I realize we can't do everything for everybody. I really wish we could. But childcare was brought up, and it's so hard to get good childcare, and so when you have it, it's really like to give it up or to have to change is really difficult. Is there anything that you can talk about perhaps about those folks who are going to be impacted by that, moving to Rutherford, that is not going to have that before and after school childcare just yet, maybe in the future, who knows? I don't know. But for now, what can we do? What have we thought of here?
Mark, would you like me to take that or would you like to?
Sure, you can take it.
Yeah. So the plan right now, we have been expanding our district operated before and after school care to a few other sites. And the plan at this point would be to expand at Rutherford. And so we would determine based on need whether or not expanding to one room, which would be 24 spaces, or if we would need to expand further. But we're looking at that being another site that would be a district operated before and after school care site.
That is awesome.
Through you, Chair, maybe I'll add, one of the concerns that we're not able to solve is that we've had some concerns raised that, well, at Departure Bay, I've got a community built that we kind of take care of, like private childcare together, that's an area that we're not able to solve. However, we're darn nimble now in being able to provide our own childcare. It seems to be going successfully. So before and after school care. So if demand is there somewhere and the community can't meet it, then there's nothing that would stop us from having a look. But at Rutherford itself, the plan is in place. And so you would envision that if you're going from Ney, as an example, to Rutherford, you're going to use our before and after school care, empties the current before and after school care being offered at Ney that would transition to people from Departure Bay that would be interested. So not a complete solution, but a pretty good one, we think.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Could I get a follow-up? Because Greg just asked it in the chat and kind of connects to a certain degree. Yeah. And strong start. I think that's a great question. Thanks, Greg. I'm stealing it.
For sure, through the chair as well. Mark, if you're okay if I just keep going? Okay. At this point in time, the intent is not to necessarily move the Strong Start back to Rutherford. That is a conversation we can have. Right now, we have a Strong Start at McGirr and we have a Strong Start at Frank Ney. So it actually has kind of spaced out the Strong Starts a little bit more than what they were before. So at this point in time, but that's a conversation to still be had. If we want to consider moving it, we could, but it isn't on the books right now. But both Strong Starts would stay open where they are, one at Frank Ney and one at McGirr.
Thank you. And there's so many logistics that happen with all of this. And I thank all of you for going through such a complex, it's complex, like it's really complex. And a lot of thought was given and a lot of care was given into listening to people and their concerns. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for everything that you've put into this and that more work obviously is happening. And I'm looking forward to having it open next year. Thank you.
I don't see any other questions. Is there someone who is willing to move the recommended motion? Great, go ahead.
Thank you. That the business committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, approve the 11 recommendations for the reopening of Rutherford Elementary, including the redrawn boundaries and transfer of students in the newly created Rutherford and Frank J. Ney boundaries.
And it's seconded by Naomi. Greg, do you want to motivate?
I might just say a few words in support. So I've already thanked staff. I can't say that enough. I know this has been a significant project. I will say that I'm very pleased with our process. I feel that staff have provided good opportunities for the community to share their ideas and concerns. And, you know, although we can't always respond to every individual concern, I feel that this is a good compromise and it will benefit students overall in the North End by having Rutherford Elementary opening with you know, catchment boundaries that will result in long-term stability for Rutherford. That's what this community needs, and that's why I support this motion. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I see no other comments, so I'm going to call the question and ask if there's anyone opposed to the motion, if they could type it in the chat. Okay, seeing none, motion carries. Moving on to 8.2, Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh regarding Bowers District rezoning application.
Sure, thank you, Chair. So this item is in response to a letter we received from the City of Nanaimo, and you'll notice it is some time ago, but there's a reason that the delay is there in getting to the board. So Policy 2.2 requires that a significant development, comment letters be brought to the board. So there's some room for judgment from staff when we get some of these ones, but this will be one of the biggest developments perhaps in the city's history. I'm not quite sure, but a big one. And so we're looking at 2,500 residential dwelling units. And so since we've received this, we've not only had our enrollment forecasting updated. We've put it out to 2035 rather than the 2030 that it was at. We'll have those folks come talk to the board at a future meeting. The initial report I've shared with the board, it can be made public, but I thought we'd bring it to a meeting in the future. Ultimately, what that report shows is about 150 elementary school kids and 150 secondary school kids created as a result of the development, but certainly not coming online until, you know, you can imagine that's a huge development, how long it'll take to get into place. So it's not an immediate issue with respect to capacity, but we've envisioned it as part of the Rutherford process that the business committee has just recommended. Certainly there will be an impact on our secondaries, and you can see us trying to figure out ways to address capacity, and you'll see from Wellington that that's already on its way. So we see no reason that the board either wouldn't be neutral or supportive of the housing. It's, again, I don't think these are meant to get the opinion of the board whether we believe in it or not, but whether we can support the intrinsic growth or not. And if you can imagine 2,500 residential units times what, $850 each for their school site acquisition charge also will bring a pretty penny into the board's land bank. So positive outcome there. So you see the recommended motion. Happy to answer any questions on that.
Thanks so much, Mark. Does anyone have any questions? Greg?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. Thank you for this report. I'm wondering if our projections go out far enough to predict whether or not at some point related to this development that we would need some land for a new school.
So through you, Chair, certainly we've envisioned that in our long-range facilities planning, and that's why it's targeting land just kind of south and west of Seaview as an example. So certainly at this point, we would foresee that, yes, as every inch of our schools is filled up, including opening Rutherford and filling it up partially because of this development, that we may need that. We have not envisioned an entirely new secondary school at this point. The numbers are big, but they're not. There may be solutions in our own infrastructure, but perhaps we might need someday. But again, south of the highway, west of Pleasant Valley, is an area that we foresee in future needing land.
Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up, Greg?
No, thanks.
Okay, Chantel?
Just a technical question for those who might not know. The district's school site acquisition charge. For folks who might not know what that is, if you could explain a bit further for the public, that would be fantastic.
Oh, sure. So the School Act and the Local Government Act both envision essentially a development fee. So we all are aware that there's parks fees or development charges to support amenities as the communities grow. And so we instituted a school site acquisition charge based off of growth a couple of years back now. And so what that intended to do is it's reflecting if you're developing as a community, the development community is going to be contributing to the amenities. One of those in our case is school land acquisition. And so as you know, we envision it both being greenfield, like the example that I gave south, kind of near Seaview in Landsville, or alternatively, brownfield, schools like Bayview, as an example, have a postage stamp of a footprint. But if we grow in that neighborhood where we can't afford to buy a new school site, but we might need to expand existing footprints as they are. So it allows us to get land in anticipation of ultimately the ministry funding additional capacity. We have about I think it's about 350,000, but I have not looked in the last month or two in our bank.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'm seeing no other questions. Is there someone who'd like to move the recommended motion? Don't be shy. Chantel?
I think it's how fast we type, right? Right, so the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District Number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, direct staff to provide response to the City of Nanaimo with respect to the Bowser's District rezoning application, that the district anticipates it will be able to support student enrollment associated with the project.
Seconded by Naomi. Chantel, do you want to motivate?
I think a good explanation has been had, and we've redrawn our boundaries. We're doing all that we can do with growth, and I think staff has given us some good information that I'm comfortable with. So, thank you.
All right, I see no one else in the chat with comments. If there's anyone opposed to the motion, can you please type it in the chat? All right, motion carries. Moving on to 8.3, Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh, RE multi-year financial plan.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is an item that is how to put it. It's a valuable document it's number one, a compliance document. So the board is required to pass this and submit it to the ministry on a yearly basis. And the intention, of course, is to align with the ESSL. So, we've got results and we need to see changes, and here's where the changes are going to be. But what's kind of come about with the multi-year financial planning is there's a bit of a hiccup. So when it was envisioned back in the day when they were doing the review of the funding model, the idea was districts said, well, look, if you want us to plan 3 or 4 years in advance, guarantee our funding so we can plan with guaranteed funding. So the other side of that was, but if you're going to give us funding, we understand that there needs to be accountability. And what happened is that we got the accountability accountability mechanism without the guaranteed funding. So the multi-year financial plan document is certainly required to talk about our goals, and we need to ensure that our finances are, aligned with those goals. But that really truly happens at budget time. And the reason it's a bit difficult is because, say, the board's goal is to, invest in more, counseling time as an example. And then we put in additional FTE expenditures in our budget for years 2 and years 3, but then we don't actually have any additional revenue. So our financial plan is going to say, great, we're planning on doing something that we actually can't afford. So, hey, community, we're going to have to cut something. It's a little bit disconnected in that regard, because the only way, for instance, like if we wanted to put a whole bunch more EA hours, which I know is a board goal, the board talks about, but the reality is we've kind of picked a level of funding, and then we've aligned a level of spending that essentially shows our current kind of business model, and they balance out. And so that's a place of, it's a bit dissonant in that regard. So because you need to balance, it's a bit more difficult to be aspirational. And so the other thing is, it's very difficult to determine how many kids, for instance, with designated special needs, and again, until they change the name of the funding line, that's what I'm going to call it in this presentation, because then we're predicting something that we don't quite know yet. So a little bit problematic in that regard. The place that it's good, though, and I will say, is that it's a very good barometer of where we're going, particularly with respect to enrollment. And so you'll see our enrollment continues to increase based off of our projections, which tells our community that, okay, inflation's tough, so maybe there's like year to year we might be a little under, a little over, but we're not predicting some kind of catastrophe with respect to enrollment that means huge reductions in services to students. On the other side of the coin, we're not growing at such a fast pace that we have a ton of money to reinvest, or actually, is what's happening in many really fast growing districts, is all of their additional operating funds are being eaten up by portable purchases. So they're having to use that former benefit of enrollment growth to buy space for kids. So we're hopeful that this is in alignment, and we'll continue to align more and more, and it gives you a good direction that we're going. However, I'm not sure this, the ESSL that talks about the strategies that we're going to use, the funding for that is embedded in our multi-year financial plan. So I don't want to trumpet the plan as the absolute framework. I think that the strategies associated with the ESSL are probably the best place to look, and they're reflected in our plan. So I'm not sure Ms. Sutton, who has done an amazing job with this, and people use our template in a number of districts in the province, but if she wants to make a comment prior to leaving it for questions, and this has to be passed by the board for us to send into the ministry.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Through the chair, I would just add that this is the budget and the ESSL are the most important documents. This is just a planning document, as Mr. Walsh indicated, that is required by ministry, and it's still a work in progress from their perspective. Districts across the province are submitting a variety of plans that don't align at all, and they're trying to figure out what it is that they're looking for, and how it should be presented and so forth. So it might not hit every bullet. We're doing our best to make sure that it does adhere to what they're asking us and present something that is reasonable with what our projections are and what we feel the expenses will be. But we are all very clear that if we need additional staffing out there, of course, that's going to be added, and it's going to be represented in the budget. So I just would say as well to take this with a grain of salt. And of course, the budget is the official financial document of this district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And Tanya, I see there is a question from Tanya.
Thank you. And this is just one of my sort of understanding and technical questions around the workload of these things. So, Mark, if you're there, or Tanya, So we have to, even though this is a 24 to 27 plan, we have to submit it again next year rather than just submitting it end of 2026 as we're getting ready to start a new 3 years. That feels like a lot of work if if
Yeah,
there's
so
not much change. It's a 3-year plan.
So through you, Chair. So yes. So I think the idea, and I think at the core of it is the idea is that you'd be aligning. So the ESSL says, we're doing really great in connections with kids, but we're doing, and this is just an example, but we could really show some improvement in numeracy. And so all of a sudden, what you're going to see in the 3-year plan maybe is we're going to phase out the extra program that we added for Child Connection, and we're going to make an increased investment in numeracy. Like, I think that was the kind of initial idea. And so when the ESSL says, here's what the strategies are going to be, you can kind of see a planned expenditure shift. And so for instance, say the board did invest in like a 3-year program. Like, let's give an example. Kids have said that schools are really shabby and that makes them not feel included. And then the board says, great, we're going to put, $1 million towards this, and we want to spread that over a 3-year expenditure. We might include that as a 3-year expenditure that in next year is now just a 2 more year expenditure, and that disappears. So if it was just a one-off document, then it's not going to align with your goals and the ESSL. And I think as the system has more experience and feedback, and has communities of practice on this front, they'll become the ESSL, and this will become like very closely aligned as it should be. But the answer is yes, we need to redo it each year.
And I guess to clarify, the reason I ask is I'm probably in my head comparing it to our strategic plan, and we don't go through the whole process of every year of redoing our strategic plan. We tweak it. So I guess I'm just concerned about the workload in, say, year 2 not being the same. I'm concerned about the workload on staff and the demands on staff, basically.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that, and Ms. Sutton, I don't know if you want to comment, because some of these do feel like compliance exercises, but Tanya, would you like to comment?
I would, if I could say 2 things. Thank you. It is an additional workload, and that's one of the reasons why it's not all 60 districts actually haven't complied yet, because it is an insane burden, especially on smaller districts that don't have resources, and additional staff. So it is a significant amount of work. I think one of the things ministry is also trying to get a feel for, and why it's an annual thing, is to get an idea as to how districts are ending their year and what they feel they're going to end their years with. Are they going to be in a surplus? Are they going to be in a deficit? A little bit for trying to determine what they would be able to ask us for cost shares when it comes to capital. Local capital surplus, could we share in a cost that so that they're trying to see, are we creating structural deficits by having too much staffing and not enough revenue? Are we making decisions that are putting us in a precarious place? So it's just getting an idea as to what we are planning for, so that they can plan themselves really year over year.
Okay, thank you. And I'll leave it there for now, because the reason I did ask is I saw the comment in there about advocacy, and so I'll be working on something I might bring forward for a future meeting.
Chantel?
Great, thank you. I wanted to say to Mark, I really appreciate you mentioning that you're using the term special needs, because it is in the ministry document, and that's the terms that we have to use in that. I actually appreciate that a lot, because special needs is a very old term that we're trying to move away from. I appreciate that comment. And speaking of EAs, obviously it's something we bring up all the time. And I remember bringing this up too last year, is on page 41, where we talk about the staffing and the FTE. If we look at what our conservative estimates are year over year for designated students, we're looking at approximately 70 coming, maybe perhaps coming in, right? These are all estimates. I realize that this is big time estimates. Our EAs, though, we haven't allocated more EAs year over year. It actually drops from 287 to 282, and it stays at 282, and it stays plateaued for the next 3 years. And I'm just wondering kind of what the reasoning is behind that. And I realize this is aspirational. I realize that this is kind of like just a planning document and stuff. But if this is going to the ministry and they see that we're expecting like up to 70 more kids within the next few years, does it seem perhaps like, I'm just kind of wondering like what kind of, what we're kind of showing here with this? Like, are we maybe being too reserved with this? Someone could give me some kind of background on that, that would be great. Yeah.
Sure. So just a couple things to note. So the year over year is not the best comparison because we're looking at the amended annual to the kind of projected. So, you know, our projected EA numbers in this spring, so the current year, are going to end up larger than in the amended annual. And so that reflects essentially it's a kind of conservative beginning place, knowing that we're going to be putting more funding out in the event that kids arrive. If the kids don't arrive and you front loaded that, then we've got a financial hit that we need to find somewhere else. And so it's just kind of a reversion to the mean. What I would say is that I don't think their ministry would be reading much into that, because they know if we're going to have more kids with more IEPs that are leading more funding, there's going to be more supports for them, like full stop. And so that's just the reality of it. So if we went the other way and we were predicting, so we put 300 or whatever that number was, and then we ended up having less kids, and I know we both know that that's highly unlikely, but then we're kind of giving a message that could end up not being correct. And so the good news is it doesn't actually impact the way that we're going to budget. So the way we're going to budget is this, it rolls around and we're going to be talking with the appropriate departments to say, okay, what are you seeing on the ground? Who's graduating grade 12? Who do we know is coming in kindergarten? And making our actual estimate year to year off of that basis. So our year to year budget's not going to be impacted by this.
Right. Yes, thank you. It's just a follow-up question, if you don't mind, through you, Chair. It's just when we talk about like if the ministry were to say, well, it kind of looks like they can maybe perhaps, I'm just thinking about what the ministry kind of sees, and thinking that we're maybe, we have more money than we do, sort of thing, right? Like, I just want to make sure that they understand that we're being conservative, and that it usually goes over, right? I just wonder if maybe that's kind of giving up a false flag to them, sort of thing. But again, it's an aspirational thing. It's a really hard one, and I've got thoughts on the whole process to begin with, that Tanya actually talked about earlier. But yeah, it's an odd one here.
Well, maybe what I would say is the other side of the coin I've seen with some of these documents is these massive deficits, right? Because if we, if Tanya's putting together the document and use today's dollars for 3 years from now's expenses, because we know people are getting raises as an example, so we know there's a cost coming, but we don't actually have confirmation of the additional dollars, then we could go the other way. And so what I would say is that our district and our finance team is seen as highly credible in the eyes of the ministry. And so if any issue arose, that credibility gives us the ability to call them and kind of ask. So I wouldn't go correcting it to inflate something if we miss. I guess I would put it that way, because it's not, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact. But I don't know if Tanya, you have a comment.
I completely understand, Chantal, where you're coming from, and it's not something that wasn't considered throughout the process. And from the perspective of ministry, you've got 60 districts in the province who are all making a decision whether or not to present a structural deficit or present a balanced plan. And what message does that send is for them to interpret, in that, are we planning more than we can? Or are we trying to be fiscally responsible? Are we assuming that we're going to have more kids? Are we inflating our dollars to be able to say we're going to have more of this and more of that? And we're not going to have enough money, so could you give us more funding? So there's a lot of ways that this plan can be used to send messages, to abdicate, to all those things. And, you know, I think for us, we are trying to be very transparent. There's many districts out there who don't have half, a quarter of the content that's in our plan, and we really tried to follow ministry's direction in that, you know, assumptions should be included and all the pieces, all the factors. But you really can go down a rabbit hole and say, you know, we know we're going to add that staffing, but what are we going to add? And if we're going to say, well, we're going to add maybe 10 more positions, then we have to add the revenue that we're going to receive for those students. Yet a lot of students don't come with funding, that extra funding. Some do, some don't, and yet we still support them. So in the plan, it was for just a sense of not inflating revenue and then kind of landing on a particular amount of staffing that may or may not happen or need to happen. It was leaving it status quo, the same as the administrative, the excluded, and the support staff. Only inflating teachers slightly, but not inflating it, sorry, only increasing it slightly for the actual increase in headcount of students, because that's a hard ratio. But I do understand where you're coming from, and it's not to say that we couldn't, you know, tweak this in coming years. It was just, do you add a whole lot of extra revenue and then add the expense? And if you do, where do you land on that? So I take what you're saying, and we'll do better next time, or try.
No, it's good. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that, Tanya. It's really is a hard balancing act to present something that is more like, it's not even aspirational, because if it was aspirational, it would be like it would be bigger, right? So I really appreciate that explanation, Tanya, and Mark as well. Yeah, that was my concern, and I did see that support staff too is all remaining the same and other professionals. So I really do appreciate that explanation, Tanya, and for those of you watching out there as well who might have been asking the same question, thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
I see no other questions in the chat. Is there someone who is willing to move the recommended motion? Leanna?
Hi. This is 8.3, right? I'm just juggling some screens. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I would like to move the motion that the business committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, approve the recommended 2024-25 to 2026-27 multi-year financial plan.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Chantel, did you want to motivate Leanna? I'm going to assume that's a no because you haven't. Oh, thanks. All right. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, if you are opposed to the approval of the motion, please type it in the chat. Okay, motion carries. Moving on to 8.4, Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh regarding exempt compensation reporting.
Thank you. And so this item is another compliance item as outlined in the memo. And so what it requires is the chair to sign a letter, the board to pass a motion, the chair to sign a letter with respect to the top 5 executive positions in the district and compensation. You will be seeing the SOFI report, the State of Financial Information Report, coming up. And not tonight, of course, and that's the one where you see everyone making over $75,000, expenses, vendors, etc., etc. So subject to any questions, the motion is there.
Thank you, Mark. Is there someone willing to move the motion? Naomi? Oh, there you go.
Okay, just hold on 1 second. I just got to pull it up now. The Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District Number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, receive the executive compensation report as information and direct the board chair to sign an attestation letter attached as Appendix C, acknowledging compensation paid to executive staff during the 2023-2024 fiscal year.
Thank you. That's seconded by Tom. Did you want to motivate Naomi?
No.
Okay. I see there's no discussion, so if anyone is opposed to the motion, can you please type it in the chat? All right, motion carries. Moving on to item 8.5, Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh regarding amendment to policy 2.5, Board Committee Representation and Annual Work Plan, and policy 2.6, Board Meeting Procedures.
Hello again. So the item before the board is a little bit of a thought bubble in the form of a recommended motion. And so what is being suggested, and is a change to our committee structure. So currently the way that the board functions to do its business is there's the board meeting, which is the end of the month, the required board meeting pursuant to the School Act. And then of course the board has the ability to create its own committees. We have a couple of different ways we do that. We have the two standing committees, education to discuss education related matters and business to obviously discuss business related matters. We have ad hoc committees. We have board representation on a variety of, provincial and local groups, organizations, etc. And then in addition, I will say this board does a lot of work in planning, in governance training, in professional learning that takes up a lot of meetings. And we're asking a lot on our partners to attend up to 3 meetings, sometimes more a month, and maybe budget year, etc., or budget time, etc. And so what we're suggesting is the board contemplate moving to a committee of the whole structure, which would alleviate 1 meeting a month. Now, in reality, we know that we'll probably have to add extra to discuss business and education, matters as they arise. But what that would do is it would alleviate the number of evenings that again, the board members, that staff, as well as our partners are required to attend. So if the board was interested in this, there's some changes recommended. And so just to be clear, is that this will take a little bit of work more from a policy perspective too. So the idea is that the committee of the whole gets created and a co-chair model is created. And so the reason for co-chairs is this board, I think, is very committed to kind of diffuse leadership. And so right now we have chair, vice chair, and then chair and vice chair of each committee. This, of course, would take 2 leadership opportunities away, but the chair, we would institute a co-chair model on a rotating basis. So to keep 4 leadership opportunities for trustees in meetings for succession planning and organizational continuity purposes. We would still continue to kind of split the agenda into education and then to business items. And so there's a proper amount of focus. It's awfully easy to get trapped in talking about multi-year financial plans and, development. So we want to make sure that time would be there. And then again, the second week of the month, and so that would be week off number 1, and then week 2 a meeting, week 3 off, and week 4 a meeting. So time to digest what occurred at the committee of the whole in advance of the board. And again, if there's learning, professional learning, development, governance, that's not a formal meeting, now there's room for that in the calendar that doesn't require trustees to be, meeting on a Saturday, which often happens, and through the course of the year is a difficult proposition in that regard. Now, if the board passed this motion, it would go out to consultation, and I would be suggesting that rather than kind of generally seeking feedback, that we're going to go talk to our partners directly. This motion doesn't have to pass if the board's obviously not interested. But I think it's worthwhile of a conversation, and perhaps this is a good way to talk to our partners to see if this would be a workable and desirable idea. So happy to answer questions, but again, trying to provide some feedback that has been gathered for the past year or so. We heard some discussion at this at our annual planning session in the summer as well. So recommend a motion for your consideration.
Thank you, Mark. I see we have a couple questions. Jessica, did you want to ask your question? I'm not sure what your computer.
I'm just curious. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Often the Teams doesn't work. Just kind of wondering, so if we're talking about like a reduction in meetings and whatnot, would there also be a motion to reduce the number of trustees if they are taking on less duties?
So through you, Chair, so that's not proposed in this particular suggested change. I mean, I think it's not that the board couldn't do that, and not that if the feedback was great, if you're going to do this, this should be the additional move by the board. We have a bylaw that allows for exactly that to happen. Mm-hmm. What I would say though is the intent was a little bit more to reflect that perhaps the role and time that trustees put in is kind of continuing to increase, and so that's saving an evening. But again, I leave the politics of that all to them.
Right. Just maybe a quick follow up. Is it kind of based on like challenges with sticking to agendas that are maybe making these meetings longer than they need to be? Because it feels like a pay increase otherwise.
Sure, through your chair, and again, this is just this kind of a little bit of the feedback. It's a little bit to support staff and allow, like I asked for a little bit less of their time, three nights a week. The other thing is that I think what we've been finding over the last year or so is issues have been arising, or not a year or so, that in fact the time that I've been I've been around, is that issues kind of arise and we add that extra meeting, and so then we end up at 4 out of 4 weeks, which is starting to get a lot. And then we add the Saturdays for the governance sessions, and we do some of that, and so that it's just, I think that the load is actually increased, and so it's intended to decrease. But I'm again, whether it counts as a pay cut, I would leave that to you to make a comment.
Just to, like, I think I'm the only one here who, is attending most of these meetings strictly as a volunteer. So it is kind of a little icky when people are in elected positions, and it feels like they're asking for a pay increase or less work. So just throwing that out there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tanya?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. I'm still not sure where I land on this one. I think there's a couple problems. Not problems. A couple questions and thoughts that come to my mind. I think I would almost have rather, and I must apologize that I was not at the day of the retreat where this was first discussed due to a family emergency that made me unable to be there. And well, not a family matter, I couldn't be there. Anyway, I would almost prefer it if we took a step back, met with our partners and just talked to them about different, because there's more than one model. I mean, there's even more. There's this model that we're currently using. There's the model that's being proposed, and there's a third model, at least off the top of my head, that is similar to the one that's used in Victoria, where the committees are a little more, where the committees only have a certain number of trustees. They really function as committees, and then they bring forward things to the board, and then the minutes from for example, the discussions that happen in the education committee, I'm thinking again in Victoria, almost comes forward again that same night. So, because one of the concerns and complaints we hear about our board meetings is people come and they watch our end of the month meeting, and they see no debate, and what they don't realize is, well, we've done the debate 2 weeks ago with all the same people. So I see where there's some value here, but I'm not sure I'm ready to go ahead with this without more discussion with our partner groups. That's the first thing I was going to say. And I think what I want to be clear on for me is one of the things that if we were to move to this kind of model is I don't see it as being less work. I see it as a different way of structuring the work. I'm seeing us using one of those Wednesdays that we aren't having a formal committee meeting as meetings, as nights where we could actually have some open discussions with partners about things that maybe we aren't ready to do in a formal public meeting. They're more broad conversations where maybe we can meet with partners and discuss topics of education that aren't necessarily on our work plan, or they're more I don't know how to phrase it appropriately, but I'm seeing it not necessarily as less work, as different work. If we were to move with a different way of structuring the work, if we were to move ahead with this model. And I think I'll stop talking now, because I suspect that others who were there the day that you guys discussed this can clarify what I'm getting at, because I know that a few of us have talked about it. So thank you.
Chantel.
I'm going to let Greg go ahead of me.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. So I think for me, what I heard the board want is a discussion about our current governance model and the structures that we use to oversee the district. And I think the idea here is to try to make the most efficient use of our time to really, focus our time together as trustees, as a board, and our staff in the evenings, and be as efficient with that time as we can. And that's not in any way going to lead to less work. What it will do is it would help us shift the time that we spend, and might open up opportunities to do some learning and some sort of less structured time to do some of the things that Tanya was mentioning with our stakeholders and rights holders. Working sessions as an example. We're not making decisions, but we're learning, we're participating, we're having conversations. So I welcome the opportunity to have further discussion on this issue, and regardless of what whether this motion passes or not, I think the idea is, the important part tonight is to start the conversation. And if it's not this model, then that the board wants to support, then I think we should be looking at having another session where we can maybe ask staff for a bit of support to help us through a conversation around what options are out there, including having involvement from our stakeholders and our rights holders, and come up with something that makes the most sense. That's all I have to say. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Greg. Chantel.
Great. So I think what Tanya was kind of talking about and what Greg actually expanded on, more philosophical discussions, but I appreciate him talking about learning sessions. We do that a lot, and talking with our rights holders and our stakeholders and having that time to do that would be fantastic. And again, it's actually not less work. It's just packing the work more in one night rather than the 2 nights. So what I'd like to say, though, is that I think I'd like to sort of defer this perhaps motion and maybe bring it to the policy committee coming up. There's I looked at the policy and I realized we sort of just, scratched out the committee of the whole and stuff like that. But there are some things in there that I think kind of need to be perhaps added. And that was like JEDI in the page 63, page 2 of the policy under process. There's the general one, maybe a 1.5, a JEDI statement in there, and how about making meetings accessible. I think that would be kind of a great addition to this policy. And then getting some clarification on like kind of how we could word it. But now I realize, like, if we're going to have more discussion on just what it means as a whole, maybe perhaps we defer it to a different board meeting or something like that to have more of a deeper conversation about that, and then kind of change the policy in that way. So that's kind of like what I'm thinking of. That's where my brain is going here. And I don't know how to do that. So I'm going to that's my comment. I have no questions about this exactly, but yeah, that's what I would kind of like to see happen more, as having a more a longer conversation about it, especially since Tanya wasn't really kind of there for some of it, and sort of looking at those pieces too to add to our policy. I think that can make it updated a little bit more and stuff like that. So.
Mark, I seen you popped up. Did you want to comment on that?
Just to remind the board that there's no motion on the table, so nothing has been moved, so it doesn't need to be deferred, or they could come back at a future time at the will of the board, given how how robust the agenda is, or it could be moved to policy immediately, but it's not on the floor whatsoever. It doesn't have to be moved at all.
Great, thank you.
All right, Naomi?
Hi, I like the idea of rethinking things and trying something new to see if maybe things will work a little more efficiently. In regards to the business committee and education committee, I think our district, my understanding is it's kind of unique because all trustees attend the business committee meetings and all trustees attend the education committee meetings. And there are many districts that don't, trustees aren't required to attend both sets of meetings, but it's become, the norm in our school district. So yeah, I'm supportive of looking at this and seeing if maybe there's a different way of doing it and making it more efficient. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Naomi. Tanya?
I was just wondering if if the policy committee took it back, would it be fair to the policy committee to ask them? I don't want to make a ton more work for staff. I would love it though if we could have sort of a side-by-side kind of comparison of the different models of how committee structures work in general within the province, and I suspect BCSTA could help us get that information fairly quickly. Like, I know there's the model that Naomi mentioned where only 2 or 3 or 4, I think it is, trustees will attend the committee meetings, and then it comes back to, they bring a report back to everything they talk about to the board, meaning there's the structure that is being presented tonight. There's a current structure we are currently using. Those are 3 off the top of my head. I imagine though that's pretty much it. So I'm just wondering if that's if that was something the policy committee could also include in bringing back any further recommendations. Or is that too far outside the realm of policy?
So perhaps I can respond, Chair. So the policy committee work plan will be coming to the board for approval. So perhaps that's the appropriate place to lay this item. And then typically what would happen is a background memo about, you know, the different options would go, and that's the type of research that staff typically put together, you know, other districts' policies or procedures or policies, sorry, with respect to what's before it. So that could be one avenue. And then this is also the introduction to our partners that this is something that that we're contemplating and get their feedback on kind of starting now, perhaps.
Yeah, because I think for me, my thing is I would like to start with the feedback from partner groups first as part of the policy committee making those recommendations or those proposed changes to policy. Thank you.
Greg?
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to piece together what I think I'm hearing here. Perhaps we don't move this motion tonight, and maybe we can find another time to get together with some background information on different sort of ideas for structures and have a conversation as a committee or perhaps a working session, at least to understand the different options available. And then perhaps we can get some feedback from stakeholder and rights holder groups. And then if we get a sense of whether or not it's something the board wants to consider, I think that's perhaps when we would refer it to the policy committee once there's a bit more of an understanding of whether it's something we even want to pursue. It's a suggestion.
Thanks, Greg. There's a question asking just how many meetings a month that we are actually attending. I think that changes depending on the trustee. Mark, do you think you could estimate how many meetings we have a month? Because it's not just these meetings.
Oh, through to Chair, it's how many closed meetings are happening each month?
Okay, so that would be 1 unless something comes up, correct?
So I'm looking at the last 2 published past minutes. So May 22nd, May 29th, June 5th, June 12th, June 26th, April 22nd. And then, of course, that wouldn't include if there's a governance session that's just a learning session, as an example, which the board typically averages 6 to 8 per year. I would suggest, plus the summer session, working session. You're on mute, Chair.
Chantel, you have another comment?
No, I was just gonna say, I agree with what Greg said, and yep, I support that. And thank you, Mark, for counting the meetings. I could look at my calendar, but it's upstairs.
I'll just quickly comment, since we haven't even read the motion, I hear what Greg is saying. The only thing I would add would be that when it goes to consultation, that's exactly what it does, is it goes out for consultation, so it can be completely changed by the time it comes back to us, even by us, once we bring it back from consultation. So that would be my comment. So there is a recommended motion. but if the will of the board is that we're just going to do something different, if someone has a different motion that they would like to propose, I'd be willing to entertain that. Chantel?
I guess this is a process question. So technically, we don't have to have a motion at all tonight for this. We could just ask the chair to put it on an agenda coming up or a governance session or something like that. Is that what I'm understanding, Mark?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we'll just take note of that we will add this to another session. Is that correct, Mark?
Yeah, Karen will note that down for the next agenda setting meeting. I would suggest, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
If I may, Chair, just I think I heard what General Committee is wanting, and I'll work with staff to find a way to bring it forward.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to 8.6. Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh and Tanya Sutton, Associate Secretary Treasurer, regarding surplus allocation recommendations with financial statement discussion and analysis and audited financial statements. Wow, that's a humdinger.
Yes, thank you very much, Sharon. And again, I want to start off by recognizing the work of Tanya and her team. Miss Kylie Lowe, Director Lowe, has done also an amazing job in putting together what is one of the probably finest financial analysis documents in the province. I will put it against any district for transparency with respect to our financial outcomes. And so just marvelous work, and I wanted to express that publicly. This evening, what you're looking at is a number of documents, but only one recommended action. So I'm going to start why you're not being asked to pass the financial statements is because what normally happens is that our auditors come to the board in a closed session and gives the board a free and opportunity to review those and ask any questions that it has, and then ultimately will pass the audited financial statements, assuming it wants to proceed to do that, to be submitted to the Ministry of Education. So this is the first look, but we're not making a recommended motion at this time because the board hasn't had the opportunity to see the auditor's comments and ask questions of the auditor. So we think it would be a bit presumptuous for that recommended motion to go this evening before that happens. But overall, I would suggest that the FSDNA is worth a read. We'll probably spend some more time at the board meeting on it. And tonight, what we're going to focus on, however, is the surplus dollars available to the board for consideration of expenditure. So as we presented and the memo, I believe, is in the agenda as well, on the 28th of August is our financial position. And we are in a good financial position vis-a-vis particularly other districts in the province. And so we've ended the year with a healthy accumulated surplus. But a couple of important things to note right at the top is that ICY, I just want to remind everyone, ICY, Integrated Community Youth Teams, the dollars came prior to the end of the fiscal year for the use in the current fiscal year. So we've provided feedback that this is not really a great way to fund us. And of course, not everyone knows this, but those dollars, even though they're all earmarked for use this year, added like over $1 million to our surplus. It's not actually a surplus because those monies need to be expended in the current year. So what we're hopeful is in future years, that's not going to occur. We'll just be able to incorporate it into the into the actual annual budget and get it after July 1. The other item that's really important, and I think it's worth reminding our community, is that this board I will commend the board, I will commend the finance team for attempting to try to focus today's dollars on today's kids. And one of the things that happens around the province is, and it's rightfully so, is that districts put they put aside money, variety of dollars, for capital expenses. So your computer purchases, your upgrades that are not funded from AFG, capital contributions, those types of things. And most districts, including us up to 2 years ago, incorporate that in our operating budget. And so say it was $1 million as an example. If we put that operating transfer into our preliminary budget, we would have been in a deficit position and put in the position of recommending service reductions to the district. However, at the time of the preliminary budget, we also could see by our quarterly update, our Q3 update, that we were going to be in a surplus position. So we could anticipate, due to, failure to fills, or money that we realized that we're able to transfer, from operating to the CEF that's appropriately supported, as an example, that we were going to be looking at a surplus at the end of the year. And so we didn't budget that capital transfer. It doesn't mean it doesn't have to happen. And so right off the bat, when we look at what our operating surplus is, about $5.5 million, you're going to be seeing a recommendation of a local capital transfer of a fairly significant amount of that dollars, about $3 million of it. And so I'm going to outline what that's going to support, that particular aspect of the recommendation. Then we're going to walk through about $1.1 million-ish of expenditures for the current year, and then a recommendation to leave some of the funds unallocated. And I'll explain why, and of course Laura's here to outline how it'll support goals and support questions at the end as well. So with respect to the local capital transfer, you see there's a recommendation of $3 million transferred. To be clear, it's actually $2.4 million. And the reason it says 3 is because the board already allocated $600,000 for Rutherford. It's just we're making that transfer now. We put it in operating surplus last year, and we're making the transfer now. And so all the desks and all the equipment and all the things that Rutherford's going to need, that's the money that the board's already earmarked. So what we're actually looking at is a $2.4 million capital transfer in reality, a new transfer. So what would that go to? The first thing that it would go to, it'd be the completion of the equitable access to network infrastructure. And we've called it shorthand the kind of Wi-Fi program, but I want to be clear that it's not just that. It absolutely applies to wired supports as well. And so we know our teachers use technology, and our students use technology to support learning. And so it's not just enhancing Wi-Fi, it is making sure that our teachers have access to it in all parts of the school, wherever their classroom is, to access those technology tools that they need to make sure that learning happens. And so I know, okay, we're limiting cell phones in schools to a certain extent. So how would that the question might arise, why do we need to continue this? Well, again, the reality is particular elementary schools, they've never really been used too heavily as a tool, but we still have iPads to support learning. We still have, Chromebooks to support learning. We still have teachers with laptops that are supporting learning with that technology. That's still not completely equitably distributed across the system. The investment, and we didn't put a specific number because there's a bit of flex in the tech and the infrastructure. In our 3-year capital plan, there is more specific, but there is a bit of flex once it gets into the local capital. But that's what if we don't infuse those dollars, we're not going to be able to complete our infrastructure upgrades. And we're about 70% or more of the way through that program. And so we've got some more elementary schools to hit. And once we're done, we'll come and report out on how that's gone. The second one is the refresh and replacement an expansion of using technology. And so this is what I was talking about with Chromebooks, with teacher laptops, with all the things that we're supporting learning with technology. And we know now by limiting access to cell phone use, we're probably going to have even more pressure. And so we don't quite have a plan on necessarily a huge expansion, but we've got our eyes to it. The other thing that's come to our attention is that we have a lot of itinerant employees, and we've always asked our Learning Services Department to fund technology for those folks, and there's just simply not enough in their budget to be able to achieve that. And so for school-based staff, principals and other school-based staff that get technology, so our IT department is the sole provider of that technology. We're going to be bringing our itinerants in as well, so they have quality technology, because if you think about it, they're the ones having to travel from site to site, and they really, really need it. And so we're going through how many additional people will be supported out of this pot, but it certainly needs a transfer. Continuing construction of learning studios. I think that we're aware what a great benefit it is, not just to our students and our CUPE folks who are building or rebuilding the units, but also to teachers once they finally get on site as a quality educational space. Enrollment growth. I mentioned earlier districts, some districts that are having to buy portable after portable after portable are dipping huge amounts of money into their operating fund, not just to place portables, but to purchase them. We are in the fortunate position, particularly if the board passed the Rutherford motion, probably not to have to buy another portable in the next 5 years. But we still have to move them, and they are costly to move. But ultimately, we're going to need them at tight spaces and at our secondaries for the foreseeable future. Rutherford has noted that money was previously committed. And then the other idea is that we do want Davis Road to happen, and we do want ND to happen. And we know, particularly with Davis Road, that we may result in a capital contribution of some kind. And so to use money in another area when we theoretically could make a capital contribution for a more expensive project would suggest to the ministry maybe it's not a priority of ours. And so I think it's very important that we're cognizant of that. So that's the capital side of it. From the operating side, what has occurred is the departments have reviewed the strategic plan, and the departments have reviewed some needs with respect to directions we want to go. When we're looking at expending operating dollars, it's important to realize that every time we spend operating dollar on an employee on an ongoing basis, that's going to be an ongoing expense. So this year, the example was we had, more EAs, and then all of a sudden we had less EAs because we cut all of the one-time funds out of the system. They were only ever intended to be one-time, but ultimately the expectation and the feeling that we're reducing services ends up there. So we're very wary about that. So you'll see in the recommended motions, though, we do, of course, have a suggested $150,000 money into the EA contingency. I also want to be clear that there already is a restricted number from the previous budget or the previous memo on August 28th, that's $150,000 as well. And so this would be a $300,000 one-time increase to the EA contingency. We do know that there's a lot of students coming to us and they're getting designated, but there's also other needs. So we may get some funding to be able to offset that, but we know the need is there right now. So the kind of, it's a bit of an exception to the rule that I just suggested, that to be very wary of investing ongoing dollars in staffing. Number 2, data initiative support. So the board's got the strategic plan. It's got really great metrics to see how we're doing, but we're still not quite across the finish line with respect to kind of aligning, what the information that we're gathering and how we're going to be presenting it and people understanding. And so the idea is that we would second or contract or something like that on a temporary basis, an individual or individuals to be able to support that work. Employee wellness and safety. And so we've just finished an employee engagement survey done by an external party. And some things have come up that suggest that there's some areas of strength and some areas of improvement. And I know that information will come to our community at some point. But we've really looked at this. And so we say wellness and safety. So on the safety side of things, we have expanded our facilities team extensively, and we do see some areas that we could support some safety training on a one-off basis that would really put us on solid footing, and in other areas as well. The other piece for these funds is that we want to start talking about what other wellness initiatives would be able to look like. And so there's not specifically where it would go, but we would need to be talking to our partners. We would need to be getting, I don't know if it's focus groups or what have you, to get together to see what type of employee wellness initiatives or what the initiatives themselves cost, and start to look at how we can implement that, because that was one of the things that our community is very interested in. Employee engagement. And so our recent survey has suggested again that this is an area of an opportunity for us. And so what does that look like? We're still kind of talking about that without the funds. We don't want to be presumptuous, but does that look like staff attendance at certain staff meetings to make sure that they're up to date on what the strategic plan look like? As an example. District communications. So we've already talked about upgrading our website external looking to make it more functional, because we know there's some issues there. But what about the internet? How are we getting resources to people? How are people sharing and understanding CETSAS? How are we getting that message out and connecting with each other? Another area that our community our employment community has said is a priority for them. And so not a specific outcome of the funds, but that they'd be set aside for that purpose. Boardroom technology, you can't say no to this one because we spent the money. So the idea that we've had some choppy meetings and sometimes it's difficult to have hybrid, we want to provide the flexibility to our community and to our board members and staff with respect to participation in the board. And so we're going to do a small investment, which I think is getting installed today to improve that. Environmental upgrades. And so not necessarily what's on the page there. We just wanted to make sure that every aspect of our, vision and our goals were being reflected. And so one of the areas that we find is an area of opportunity is waste reduction and waste sorting, in fact. So schools, we've made small investments in schools to make sure that there's more bins, to make sure that things are going in the right places to ensure environmentally sustainable practices. That's one area that we know that we can expand to other schools, and it's just a hardware cost that we're recommending. Portable moves is another area. So portable moves, we mentioned that there's enrollment growth funding from a capital plan transfer perspective, but since the Rutherford decision looks like, or it's, the board business committee is recommending it, we foresee planning ahead. So right now it's taking us like a year to move a portable because of our planning and then the city's permitting and then the installation, etc. We want to start looking at the portables of the impacted schools of the Rutherford Open to start contemplating moving them to where we can serve more students in advance. Proactive maintenance. And so I know that there's a few things here. One of them is ND as an example. And so, we've been working, the board has been working incredibly hard and lobbying our government to invest in that building. But even if we get approved next spring, we're not going to see that building rebuilt or, built somewhere, built on the lawn as an example, or for a number of years. And so we want the kids that are in that school now to have a sense of community, have places to sit, have improvements. So as an example there, we also envision some additional dollars for accessibility, although our AFG program has already envisioned that as well. So it's a drop in the bucket, but it's also a statement supporting the long-range facilities plan and the safety and well-being of our students and our employees as well. Truth and reconciliation. And so, again, this is an area that we heard from our staff that cites us as an example. We want to be getting it throughout the system. And so truth and reconciliation is an important function, important goal of the board. And so it needs to be reflected in when we have additional dollars to spend. Finally, and I put this in the operating budget, but I want to be clear that this would actually go unallocated for 1 year and it would be incorporated next year. And that's the program that we have as a vice principal as a TTOC. So the board has heard some concerns in the past. I think senior staff have raised them with the board, and you've probably heard them from the principals on the ground. You know, a vice principal can often be a very difficult task of being, you're a part-time administrator, but also almost a full-time teacher. And so what we've done in a number of schools last year is we've said, okay, great. What we're going to do is we are going to have you not have your own classroom. We're going to have you be the school's essentially floating TTOC. And so they're getting to know kids in every single class, getting to know all the teachers' classrooms, etc. And then they have more time to be able to focus on their administrative tasks because they don't necessarily have all the evening prep and they don't have some of those things as well. And so we've had feedback that it was very well received, and the idea is potentially expanding that program. There is an expense to it because, of course, you're hiring another teacher who's got yes, you might be on the other side saving a bit of money on, not having to call a TTOC in. You still have a teacher with benefits. You still have those type of things. And our absentee budget, or our substitute budget, continues to balloon. And it's just the reality of a provincial dynamic that we have not yet see unabated. And then finally, we are suggesting that the board remain with essentially a reserve of approximately 1.428. It says 1.528, but that includes the 100 from the VP as TTOC. And what we're seeing is we last year, as an example, had an emergency occurred. We would not have been able to be nimble enough to address it. Had we missed significantly in our estimates on the average teacher salary, had we not, we did miss on our substitutes and TTOCs. Had that been worse, we could have been coming to you with a deficit. I know it's unlikely. But other things that we're seeing around the province is a huge increase in risk with respect to technology issues, so cybersecurity issues. And a single issue can cost districts enormous amounts of money. And so what we're looking at is kind of keeping that reserve balance to be able to be nimble if an event occurs. And the other thing, of course, and I warned about staffing, is not only is adding staffing theoretically creating a position where we're looking like we're reducing in the spring budget, we also might not have the staff to necessarily fill all the positions we're looking at. And so this doesn't prevent the use of that dollars throughout the year, but that is certainly we're suggesting prudence on that front in this year. So Laura, I don't know if you want to comment or if everyone's already asleep because of my presentation, but I thought it would be valuably thorough prior to answer any questions. But the recommended motion is there for any discussion.
I'm not seeing any questions at this moment. I'm just gonna say thank you, Mark. I think we can all speak to saying that we appreciate the thoroughness because it is important, and the explanations you've given and the rationale behind them are very helpful. Chantel, you have a question?
Yes, and Mark, my apologies. I kind of missed a little bit of it. It's been a really long day, and I kind of, got a little distracted for a moment. And so if you've spoken about this before, my biggest apologies for you to repeat that. It's about the portability fund that we had last year. I think there's a surplus or sorry, leftovers from last year. Are we going to be using it for the same thing? Is it going to schools? Are schools telling student or families that they can use it again, or something like that? Like, how are we using that surplus?
Oh,
or,
okay.
sorry, leftovers, not surplus, leftovers.
So through your chair, there was minor leftovers, but then it was actually incorporated into the new fund that was announced last year. And so this doesn't, so really what's happening again is we're taking the food side out of the affordability fund, and then we're going to be issuing funds to schools. I believe the intention is largely on a basis it was last year, but we're going to be sitting down as a group and getting that group together again to confirm how it's going to go out with a report to the board coming up as well. What we've done in the short term, though, is like even before we broke for summer, we thought, oh, Learning Alt needs some money. Let's get some money to Learning Alt. Snuneymuxw needs some money. Let's get some money to Snuneymuxw to support kids in the summer. And then we'll be looking at the school allocations coming here quickly. I don't have that at the drop of at my fingertips, but we will have a report soon. But we really want to bring our kind of consultation group back together to make sure that we're on the right track. It will likely be divvied out to schools, not on maybe on an FTE basis plus some equity dollars, is what I would suspect.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It was very good. A lot of information, and I'm glad we have a surplus to be able to put towards these things. Really, really important things that we're doing. Thank you.
Jeff?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have a comment on a few of them, so I could just maybe comment on a couple. I noticed Naomi's there, and then I could go back on if you want, or I could do it all at once, whatever you want. Yeah, I just want to say, let's start with the good stuff. Thanks to Mark and his team for this great report. QB really appreciates the continued production of the learning studios. And the proactive maintenance, just a quick question on that, if I can. Are we planning on using our guys to do some of that proactive maintenance?
Sure. Through you, Chair. So, Jeff, as you know, our kind of North Star is to have our own people do it because we do it better, we do it cheaper. I wouldn't guarantee. I don't want to guarantee it at this very moment because what I worry about is. One of the things that we've run into a bit in AFG, as an example, is we've got to the end of the year and we actually have a little bit of money left over on occasion because we haven't been able to expend it all. And so I'm very cognizant of being able to expend it all. So it theoretically could be a contracting out situation, but I doubt it because our planners are planning the work, but I just don't want to guarantee it at that time. But that, of course, is our philosophy generally. We're having discussions on how we can incorporate even more of our work, flooring as an example, into the district. But there's a chance that there's a project or two that gets contracted out. The other thing is some of that money, because it's flexible, may go to like equipment or furniture or something along that lines, depending. Like example, ND, we've heard there's no place for kids, or not no place, but limited place for kids to congregate. Maybe it's outdoor seating or something like that. So we're not building it, we're buying it.
Okay, thanks.
Did you want to ask a follow-up, Jeff?
Yeah, about a different one, but would you like me to go back to the speakers list?
Sure, I'll let Naomi go and then I'll come back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Naomi?
Thank you. Yeah, I was really excited to see the vice principal TTOC idea put out there, because I do know, like, especially in the elementary schools, they'll teach 0.8 and then they have admins for 0.2, and it's a very, very challenging job. So I thought this was very creative and interesting to hear that you've had really positive feedback about it. I also wanted to, I have a couple questions. Where is it? Oh, one other comment was just that also, I can see the strategic plan reflected in this budgeting. I really like the idea of put some money aside for support staff to attend staff meetings. I think there's always been a bit of an issue of a disconnect because they're not privy to what's going on in those meetings. And so I think that was a really great thing to see that reflected in there to build better communication, etc. My question was around, well, there was two. Okay, so the one I wanted to understand was the $50,000 for Brecken. I didn't really understand what that was about, and is somebody able to elaborate on that?
Through you, Chair. Naomi, could I just ask you to highlight what page that's on?
Oh dear, I didn't actually put a page down, and I did on some of the other ones, but not that one. Just a second. I don't know if I'll be able to find it. I'm sorry.
Tell me again what it was, Naomi, and I can look for it because I've got it
There
right
was like
open right here.
50,000 it said that was allocated for Brecken School, and I was just wondering what that was about. Okay, so I'm getting closer to it. Just a second. Oh, unfortunately,
sorry, through you, Chair. Yes. So on page 4, this is from the August 28th document. So
yeah.
This is just a reserve dollar. So these are money that we can't change. It's just that we were doing upgrades at Brecken's with respect to their HVAC system, and so that's just money that's been committed that just hasn't been paid yet as of July 1st. So we committed to it. The works is already done by now, I'm sure, and then just it goes to them. But if we have the money in our account on July 1st, we need to explain what it's for. So that's a restricted amount. So there's a number of examples there that we couldn't expend in a different way.
Right. Okay. Can I have a follow-up? And it's on the same page, actually. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Naomi.
Yeah, okay, just a question about the NDTA, the teacher mentorship grant. I'm just wondering, it doesn't seem that a lot of that fund has been used. Like what what's happening with it? Because the balance was 280,000 in 2020-21. I don't know if you're understanding. I'm just wondering, it's like, there's only been, what, 25,000 spent on it? Do we have, is this a combined thing with the district staff and NDTA to do mentorship, or?
So through you, Chair, my understanding is you can see the money was set aside, some time back, and of course, COVID hits. This is money that sits on our books that's actually, though, under the control of the NDTA for the expenditures on it. So of course, we can work with the NDTA and, see if we want to partner on things, but ultimately, it would be their determination on how it's expended. And so I can only assume that there, maybe it's the difficulty filling people or whatever the plan, but that's probably a discussion that we take away, and maybe it's to go to TTLC to ask the NDTA about that. And of course, I'm sure Laura and her team are constantly wanting to talk about professional learning opportunities, but we can't kind of require the expenditure of those dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and Chair, just Joe from the NDTA has just sent spending has occurred this year. It's just not yet reflected in the budget. So, and that's this. Remember, this is a snapshot in time as of June 30th on where dollars were sitting, and so just so everyone's aware, lots of expenditures have occurred on some of these dollars since that time.
Perfect, thanks. I'm going to circle back to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess 2 more comments on 2 other actions here. Number 3, under the recommended expenditures, the employee wellness and safety. Very happy to see that. Like to see maybe some guardrails on this, on the second part, whereas the sentence, the funds would support human resources in creating wellness initiatives that meet staff needs. Not with this board, but in previous boards, that kind of vague language has actually turned out into another manager. So I'm just hoping that if this is a true employee wellness initiative, that's where that money is intended to. So it was just that comment. Okay, the big one, EA contingency increase. I gotta admit, pretty surprised to see this on here. Not because of the trustees. I've heard many of you, almost all of you, talk about wanting to invest in our EAs. I see the finance department realizes that too, or they heard your message and they put that there, so we really appreciate it. Unfortunately, there's a huge gap of communication between the board and the HR department, because the HR department recently took hours away from our 26-hour EAs. And then on top of that, they changed a practice, which is making certain EAs have a hard time getting to their second job on time. So there's a gap there. So I'm kind of surprised to see this. So I wanted just to bring that up was before we spend any of this surplus, I think we have to give back to the EAs that time was just taken from. They didn't get their extra hour this week. We don't know if they're going to get it when or if they're going to get it because of HR's decision. So hopefully we can clear that up, because that's created a lot of strain on EAs at a super busy time. But if I can just focus on this part, on where we want, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. Because we appreciate the money being recommended here. But how it's being used is a concern. It says in here that is likely in the form of additional staff. Well, our question is, where is this additional staff? There is no more EAs, right? We have a call board. If you take 4 EAs, because about 150,000, you probably get close to 4 EAs. If you take 4 EAs off the call board, that is now 4 EAs less to fill in, which is how we ended up with a bit of a surplus anyways, with all the failure to fills. We've said this on and on. I think we're missing the fundamental issue of the hours for EAs of making this a job that people want to take. You know, we're in an affordability crisis. Nobody wants 26-hour jobs. They don't. They're quitting in droves. We're seeing it more and more. We would like to see, I think, for about 150,000, you could actually get about 5 hours extra EA time for every elementary school. Boy, 300,000, because Mark was talking about that other 150. Wow, if you could almost give 10 hours extra time to every elementary school in the district, EA time. And between Kendall Kodar, myself, and the principals, because every school might be different. Maybe some wants more supervision time, maybe some want a crossing guard, maybe someone wants to start a homework club, I don't know. We can come up with some different ideas on how that money can be spent. I know it's a one-year thing, but you know what? Let's go back and talk to the principals and the teachers and the sports staff in the spring and see how that worked. I think that's better use of that money to actually enhance the service to our students. Because I truly don't believe just by adding 4 more EAs that technically don't exist, we're just taking away from our on-call list and we're just putting them somewhere else. We're not really enhancing anything. We might be helping that hotspot, which is a good thing, but we're not doing that investment, which I think you guys want to do. Because I tell you, if you're looking at investing this money, this is the biggest investment I've seen towards EAs in my entire career here. So this is great. This is great. We're having this conversation. But just like to look at that a little bit deeper into how that money would be spent. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. . Mark, did you want to respond?
Yeah, so I probably don't have a great response because typically what we would be doing then is the funding would then flow to Learning Services Department to make a determination on where the needs are with respect to the expenditure of EA dollars. So it's that's the kind of workflow from here. Is so we've heard that the need is there. We know that literacy, numeracy, and success, particularly for targeted populations, is pretty fundamental. And so that's why you are seeing a fairly robust increase. And I will also say that we get more kids getting designated with probably even more money flows, but that's just one of those things that generally happens when funding arrives to support those kids. That I guess that's as deep as I can go on that response right now.
Thank you, Mark. I see no other questions right now. Is there someone who's willing to move the recommended motion? Naomi? Not sure if you're having tech issues there, Naomi.
No. Okay,
Oh,
I got it.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to find it. The business committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, approve the recommendations contained in this action sheet to allocate the unrestricted surplus to support the board's goals.
Is there a seconder? Chantel, thank you. Naomi, did you want to motivate?
Oh, just that there, obviously, and I know it's been acknowledged by others too, there's been a lot of work put into this. Really appreciate it. I see a lot of it is exciting to me, just to see some of our, strategic plan, you can see it in action in this surplus. And also, this has been very good discussions, appreciated, comments and thoughts by different people, like Jeff, what you had to offer us in terms of ideas and awareness. I just recommend that we move this recommendation.
Thank you. I see no other comments in the chat. If there's anyone opposed to the recommended motion as moved, please type it in. Okay, Mark is opposed. So motion carries. Moving on to 8.7, Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh regarding the childcare policy consultation and feedback.
Great, thank you, Chair. So last year, draft childcare policy was passed by the board to go to consultation. That has been done. Now, we received one bit of feedback, and that's reflected. We didn't add the email, but we did add the idea in the memo with respect to the feedback. But based off the feedback, we weren't suggesting any changes. However, an issue arose this summer that we realized that had the policy passed in its current or its form, that we would actually not have been able to take an action that we think was best for kids. And that specifically is we've actually expanded before and after school care, district provided before and after school care even further than we were originally proposing last summer or last spring, because we had an example where there was a provider that may have been ceasing their operations with respect to before and after, at least at Fairview. And so what we did was we, good on Jackie and Laura and Diane for, you know, seeing a need and meeting the needs of families. And so that's been done. Had the policy passed, like I said, we would have had to come to the board, and who knows if that could have happened in time. And so what we've added under 5, so the idea is that the board shall approve the expansion or reduction of sites providing board provided childcare. District staff may decide to expand or limit the number of licensed spaces being provided at previous sites. So we come to you and we say Rutherford's going to get before and after. As Jackie mentioned, it might be 24 seats, it might be more if the demand is there. But what we've added is the discretion in emergent circumstances that we can add additional sites. So if someone's going to fold in summer and we realize that there's going to be an issue for our families, and we think that we have the ability and the EAs at the site to do it, which Fairview is a great site for it. We have the ability as staff to make that call. And so we don't think that that's significant enough change to go out for consultation. And otherwise, the policy is recommended large as it was previously presented.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions? Chantel?
Thank you. Hopefully this comes out legibly or I'm having a hard time talking. It's really late. It's been a really long day. And so my apologies if this doesn't come out great. The 5.2, I'm wondering if we could add something like staff must report to the board when such an expansion occurs as soon as the next meeting or something like that, or the next at the next board meeting, something like that. So it kind of gives more of a timeline of when kind of we should be hearing about that, just in case things go sideways or anything like that, that we can know about it as soon as possible.
I think I think let's just read that into it, Karen, if you could take that note. And so if the board passes the motion tonight, it passes with that language in it. And so just to be clear, the Fairview, this is your reporting back.
Thanks. So basically what you're saying is that the Fairview, the childcare was going to shut down.
So I don't know the exact discussion point, but what we understand is the before and after portion of it was at risk. And that's where we came in and took that aspect of it. I believe that there's still a childcare being like 0 to 5 being provided. It's just that the before and after is what we're going to take over, or what we've taken over.
Okay, great. Thank you. Awesome. Great.
Jeff, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, along that same 5.2, I'm curious about why it's only in emergent circumstances. I know the Fairview one happened in emergent circumstances, but I'm just curious if that maybe pigeonholes us a little bit.
Sure, through Chair, it's actually intended a bit to pigeonhole us in the sense that it's the first step is the board approving on a regular basis. So 5.1 is the board shall approve a new site. 5.2 is except where it's emergent, staff can take the step to do it on their own accord. So springtime rolls around, we come, like last year, we reported back, they were successful at Hammond Bay and Pleasant Valley. We think we should move to, 2 more sites. That type of reporting would happen on a regular basis, and ultimately the board would approve the recommendation to expand sites. I mean, it's almost never going to happen mid-year. Expansion, and so it's not meant to stop expansion. It's just meant to say the board is the authority to make the call whether we're going to add an additional site.
Okay, thanks.
Greg?
Thank you. Through you to Chair. So just a question to staff. Do you foresee there being any, significance, not a great word, but significant budget implications relating to taking over additional sites without coming to the board?
Well, in this particular case, obviously we're in a great position from receiving pilot funding for a childcare manager, as well as support staff member to help that childcare manager. And so in fact, in a way that's good, because now we're extending administrative costs to yet another site. Of course, we're going to be collecting money for the costs of our own employees who are doing the services. So there there theoretically could be a time where, say we're at 7 sites, and if we go to the 8th, the childcare manager is going to need an assistant manager or something along that lines, and that would be a contemplation before we ever did. So it's not going to be an automatic assumption of that duties, and frankly, theoretically Fairview could be like a 1 year if we thought that it was going to cost us money. So we're confident that we're going to be able to do it on a cost recovery basis.
Okay, I guess my comment is just in general, I support the change. I guess my only hesitation was to making sure that the board is not is still overseeing the sort of financial piece of this if there are any, you know, significant investments or expenditures rather that are required to do it. But it sounds like those would come to the board. Did I hear that correct?
Oh, if there's sort of a significant initial expenditure to pursue a program wouldn't happen on an emergent basis. So facilities are there, our EAs are there. We just need to, you know, make sure we're applying it with our union partners the way that we've been doing it at other facilities. And if the numbers weren't going to support it, we wouldn't be proceeding. Well, at least without coming to the board. But capital expenditures, as an example, wouldn't be part of this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no other questions. Is there someone who's willing to move the recommended motion? Greg?
Thanks. I just have to navigate back to the beginning of the agenda. Okay. That the business committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, and I'm Ladysmith, adopt policy-childcare services and early years programs as amended.
Thank you. I see Tom has seconded. Greg, do you want to motivate?
I don't think there's anything further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other comments in the chat. If there's anyone opposed to the recommended motion, can you please type it in? Okay, motion carries. Right, moving on, we have no correspondence referred from the regular board meeting, no unfinished business, no new business, and no for information. There are also no questions. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Naomi, seconded by Tom. Anyone opposed? All right, thank you so much. We are adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone.
Yeah.